Welcome to the virtual event Identity and Access Management for the Hybrid Enterprise, discussing the multiple approaches of moving identity and access management to the cloud. I'm Sonja Offerman from B Executive Events and will be your event moderator. This morning, we have the pleasure of hosting a group of guests from a broad range of industries to join our invited speakers from ForgeRock and Service Layers. Gerhard Zehethofer, Vice President, IoT and Technology Partnerships at ForgeRock. Hi, Gerhard.
Hi.
And Heiko Hütter, CEO at Service Layers. Also, Heiko, good to have you with us today.
Hi, good morning.
Most organizations have defined or are defining the cloud strategy, but in their setup of today, still need to consider a hybrid environment that has special requirements when it comes to integrations and capabilities that might exist in one environment, but are missing in the other one. This topic, and of course more insights, will Gerhard and also Heiko share with you later. So what can you do to overcome these obstacles and provide a seamless experience to your users and customers? But before we dive into the content, just a quick reminder of our house rules. Please always feel free to use the chat. If you have any questions, we will take them later when we open up for the discussion. Also, if you would like to contribute to the discussion, just use the raise hand function and we can unmute your microphone. Also, please note the event will be recorded and the recording will be shared with you later, also together with the presentation, so you can continue your conversation with the both speakers because you will also find the credentials. And with this, enjoy, and we are really looking forward to receiving all your questions and thoughts. Happy to talk to you in the discussion later on, but for now, again, welcome Gerhard, welcome Heiko, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Sonja, for the kind introduction. So yeah, you already alluded to it. Why are we talking about hybrid IAM and hybrid enterprise today? And digital transformation got a significant boost over the last 12 months. Actually, according to a McKinsey study, we achieved in 8 weeks what would have taken the industry 5 years without COVID when it comes to digital transformation. We in ForgeRock have conducted a survey a while back during the high time of the pandemic and asked consumers about their behavior during the pandemic and also their plans after the pandemic when it comes to consuming online services, be it shopping, be it video conferencing, or working from anywhere. And while the percentages change slightly from region to region and across age groups, the trend is very consistent. The online behavior will not go back, so this is a permanent change. And organizations around the world were forced to cope with this revolutionary change and had to make sometimes tough decisions. I'm sure some of you had to make some tough decisions as well. That often meant bringing in new services in days or weeks would have taken months for a normal project. That could be a company-wide video conferencing service or allowing personal devices to be used on the corporate network, remote working for a much larger group of the population within an organization, and digital signature tools to digitize processes end to end. Since there is no going back, according to the data that I just mentioned, now is the time to assess the situation and prepare for the new situation and for this permanent change, and ideally make this a competitive advantage compared to some of your competition in the marketplace. And I chose this picture because it illustrates the old world. You were safe behind the perimeter or the wall in this case, and not protected when outside or even an enemy. So the world was simple. But if we apply this analogy to the data center, the question is, where is your data center located? And the answer is simple, it still is behind the wall. The question is it all of the data center or is it only parts of it? And chances are that you have had for a while, or just recently due to the pandemic, added new capabilities that are delivered from a third party through a cloud service or another location outside of your data center are very high. And then on top, you have probably more employees working from a remote place. Some may even have privileged access rights, and that poses specific risk to the overall situation. And no surprise, cyber criminals are seeing this as an opportunity. And we also conducted a study, the Identity Breach Report, which you can find on the ForgeRock homepage. And the average cost of a data breach in Germany is 4.5 million for every single breach. And I only have US data for that, but breaches containing usernames and passwords for unauthorized access increased by a staggering 450% in 2020 alone. And we will come back to this in a moment. But before we talk about the details, a few definitions. We mentioned earlier in the title, we are talking about the hybrid enterprise or hybrid IT. So what is it? Hybrid IT is a combination of applications and services running in the local data center and in one or multiple clouds, so basically from a different location. Some also call this hybrid cloud, especially when there is more than one cloud involved, or multi-cloud. Since there is no going back, we've asked Forrester to analyze the situation, and they surveyed 300 IT managers around the world. And in the following slides, we will talk about the findings. And I'd like to share them with you because they may give you good insight to avoid some pitfalls or hiccups during your migration project. But before we do this, I would like your input, how your IT infrastructure looks today. And for that, we have prepared a poll. Sonja?
Correct. And every one of you should now see a little pop-up window appearing. And the question is, your IT infrastructure today and in the future, existing and planned. And just a side note, of course, it's totally anonymous and we cannot track anything. The question A was on-premise, or B, on-premise hybrid IT, or C, hybrid IT to hybrid IT, or existing hybrid IT to cloud only, or E, cloud only and cloud only. And just take your time. We just leave the poll open a little bit longer and we're going to share the results with all of you so you can have a look if you're experiencing any troubles answering the pop-up, depending on which device you're logged in. Just use the chat, of course. And therefore, Gerhard, do you have any guess, without priming our dear attendees, what the answer could look like? Or shall we wait until you've seen the results?
I'm curious to see the results, really curious. But there is a big trend towards hybrid IT, and actually we are in the middle of that situation, as I mentioned earlier. COVID has propelled it. So I would expect hybrid IT to hybrid IT, a little bit hybrid to cloud only, maybe, not that much. And then there may be a few organizations that are on-prem completely, moving to a hybrid environment. That's what I would expect.
Yeah, so I guess I will disclose it in a minute. So, but if we would have asked this question about 18 months ago, it would have looked completely different?
It would have certainly looked different. Whether it would have looked completely different, that depends on the industry, really, because some industries have been into cloud earlier than others.
Got it. Thanks. And here I just thank you, dear audience, for attending, and also, of course, for giving your feedback. So yes, I think B with 43% on-premise existing to planned hybrid IT, followed by C, hybrid IT to hybrid IT, and then comes on-premise to on-premise.
So yeah, that's a little bit surprising. I would have expected C to be bigger than B, but this
Since we have a wide
confirms also
audience, at least I would have expected that in this webinar here. Yeah, very surprising to see. Great. Hope we get some questions later.
Yeah. So thank you. But in general, this confirms also what we see in the market and what Forrester found out when they asked these 300 IT managers. And what is important is a peaceful coexistence of on-cloud or in-cloud and on-premise applications. Because what this survey also confirms is there is very little of the organizations, very few organizations will move 100% to the cloud with absolutely no on-premise component in a short period of time. So that it's a state of transition or a state of evolution, whichever you prefer, and it will be with an organization for a while. And so it is important to understand what to look out for. And the first thing that's important is that almost all companies have experienced challenges with IAM in the cloud, and I'll come to that a little bit later. But selecting a simple, easy to use, quick to implement, cloud-only identity and access management solution does not really solve the problems of a hybrid enterprise. The second one is also important, especially when you have then multiple systems. Forrester found out that 2/3 of the companies surveyed plan to improve the identity and access management capabilities in regards of security, but also in regards of user experience to improve the productivity, so people have an experience that is independent of where the application is located. And the third, and that's not a big surprise, organizations would like to have a solution that exactly meets their needs, since hybrid IT is not something that you travel through within a few months from on-prem to a pure cloud presence. And so a solution that can cope with that complexity is what organizations are looking for. And you can find the complete study on our homepage. But before we move off it, there is a few key items that I would like to highlight. And it might be very difficult to see the detailed labels on the icons to the left of the text. But to explain how that works is the outer circle indicates how many companies plan to engage in a project that does whatever the text says to the right, and the inner circle is the level of actual implementation. And again, I'd like to share these because they can help you to minimize or avoid altogether bad surprises. And just to quickly go through these bullet items, centralizing identity to get the additional insight that helps an organization to meet both the security and the usability, because now you have the complete 360-degree view on the user, is an important project. Actually, the majority of companies is engaging in projects like that. Understand the user's behavior is also important. That's the second one. And that's in particular important because that avoids that people can get in simply with a stolen username and password. And we've seen in the first slide that the majority of the breaches are based on weak or stolen credentials. Managing all identities in one repository goes a little bit into the same bucket, because now you have a single source of truth, you have no shadow identities, makes the management simpler, but also feeds into that complete visibility of a user. Managing industry-specific and regional and global regulations and behavior and requirements is also very important. And we park this because Heiko will talk about this in more detail in a moment. And then the last one really is Yeah, we say have it both in ForgeRock, make the platform secure and have good user experience. That's the last one here on this list, but more on this later in the presentation as well. So now let me turn it over to Heiko. Heiko, it's all yours.
Thank you. So I'd like to first go into another aspect of hybrid IT and how it influences IAM implementation these days. And one aspect that is of utmost importance is actually globalization. I mean, nowadays, users are across the globe, being it end users, being it your customers, being it your partners you work with, where you consume services or goods you need, or of course your employees. And especially, I mean, these days, nobody gets around talking about the pandemic. When more and more employees, for example, also move to remote offices, remote locations, working in a home office, they sometimes get the idea of also working remotely from somewhere else, for example. And we see a lot of customers currently dealing with that issue. How can we make that work? Can fulfill these types of requests when users really want to travel to a different country and work from there for a couple of months, for example. And from their perspective, there is not much difference, but from an IAM system perspective and also from a regulatory perspective, etc., there is a huge difference. And when we deal with these global user communities in IAM systems, basically there are two different approaches that you can go for. Both of them have their, let's say, challenges, where it's important to know them and to know how to deal with them. So the first approach, let's say, is to have a central IAM, as we see here in the slide. So we have one single system that handles all the users across the globe. Please next slide, Gerhard. And this comes with a couple of problems actually from different user perspectives. So what happens? You have services, applications across the globe that all integrate with a central IAM. So you have one single user store at one central location. Let's say in this example, it's EU, but it doesn't matter. In one of the locations, you have your IAM system. And then from the different perspective, let's say from the end user perspective, what you will see most likely is about user experience, because when you, for example, analyze a request from China going to Europe, going to the US, it is absolutely possible that a request can take 30 seconds or even a minute. And who in these days would wait for a login screen to pop up for 1 minute? That is actually not tolerable by end users, I would say these days. But also from the application perspective, what you really end up with, you have to evaluate, of course, the access tokens, for example, to evaluate the access, etc. And if the applications have the same problem, then you end up the application owners inside of your organization complaining with you about the situation, because in the end they have to give a bad experience to their end users without them even knowing, just because of your system that is integrated. So that can lead to a very let's say difficult discussion, a difficult time for you as an IAM systems provider inside your organization. But also from your end, what we see more and more actually are two factors, and Gerhard talked about this briefly already. We have multiple attack vectors. That leads to tougher regulations everywhere. Fines are getting higher and higher for breaches in that area. So yeah, the regulations get tougher here. And for example, you have situations where you have to store, for example, users in China, primarily in China. So what we see with systems like these, then you implement workarounds where you have only a local user store, then in that location, and there are multiple countries where that is the case. And it really depends also on your legal department, how they interpret the status of, for example, the EU-US privacy law. Really depending on your own evaluation of current regulations, we see a lot of workarounds in these types of situations. And most organizations end up actually implementing a decentralized IAM strategy then, and end up with a hybrid architecture as well. Please next slide, Gerhard. But of course, this is not the silver bullet. This again leads to some challenges in some aspects. So now, for example, let's start with the application perspective. Applications now have to integrate either with multiple IAM systems, or that's the more common approach. They run the applications in the different regions, the different markets for the end users, and integrate with the respective IAM system. So now you have multiple instances of your application. You need to think about how to synchronize them, how to implement that properly. So again, most application owners are not that happy with that type of solution again. Then switch over to the user perspective. I think that is an improvement to the former approach, because for most use cases, you have a better solution now, because you can really deal with also the market-specific requirements that you see. Just again, an example, in the US, social login is more a thing than in the EU, and more people are using, for example, Google Sign-in, Apple Sign-in, etc., than in Europe. Whereas in China, really everybody wants to use WeChat for basically everything they do by consuming digital services. So you really have to adopt a bit to the market specifics and what users are expecting in those markets. And you can do that pretty well with this distributed approach. But then again, if you have not a strategy to mitigate that, you basically increase the maintenance factor and the overhead by every single system that you set up, let's say. So you increase the implementation complexity quite a lot. You have an implementation overhead, and really depending on where your team sits that manages all these systems, it can also lead to having support only in a local time zone that's not really fitting where the users actually are. So there are a lot of challenges to solve, but you can solve them. I'm making it briefly here, just saying at this year's EIC, I gave a talk in length about this topic. If you're interested about that, you can go into that or contact us later. But this is absolutely an example of how you have to deal in this hybrid IT environment, because it's also very likely that IT infrastructure looks pretty differently in all these regions. So you have to adopt to the circumstances there as well. Next slide, please. And talking about complexity, I mean, a good stakeholder analysis for any IAM project that is running is always important, and we have these slides now for, I don't know, so many years. So I will not go into every aspect here, also having the time in mind, but I want to highlight briefly a couple of things here. One is the two-dimensional aspect of all the requirements that are coming from the different departments, because IAM systems are systems that are heavily integrated in basically your whole IT landscape. So this means, and I think it's getting very clear when we look at cloud strategies of the companies. If your company adopts a cloud strategy to say, we want to move all our workloads to one single cloud provider, this of course means your IAM system should move to that cloud provider, if that is your strategy. But it also means all your integrated applications will move there. And that will affect, of course, the integration with your system as well. So being prepared for that type of thing, and knowing that all of the requirements that get addressed to the broad landscape of IT affect your own system as well as all the systems that are integrated, and being prepared for that really pays out in the end. That is something that we see across all our customer base quite a lot, and it really goes everywhere. Also developers, right? If developers mainly developed on premises, now moving their workloads to the cloud. Again, this not only affects the applications that they develop, but they also expect, for example, then a better way to integrate with your IAM system, etc. And again, I'm having time in mind, I'm making it briefly and hand over to you again, Gerhard, and maybe come back to some examples later.
Yeah, thank you, Heiko. So there is, before we move on, what all this means for identity and access management, a hybrid environment. There is one topic that is close to my heart and I'd like to briefly touch on, and that is zero trust. And zero trust is an architecture or a philosophy and has the dimensions that are on this slide. So identity is an important one, but also network segmentation and endpoint security. So this is really requiring multiple stakeholders, and you cannot go out and buy zero trust for your employees. It would be nice to do that, but it doesn't work that way. What you can do though, and what you really should do, is that every modernization project that you engage in should be within the guardrails of zero trust. And the reason we're bringing this up here in the context of identity and access management is because identity is a critical pillar to zero trust. And zero trust has needs that can be best addressed with a modern identity and access management platform. And just to mention a few that come to mind here is intelligent access technologies, for example, that allow you to check third-party signals or sources of information before granting access. And some of these signals can be, geographic location, device posture, device integrity, and then you only grant access to the information required and not the entire domain. When the user wants to have access to more sensitive information, maybe a second factor or other policies are deployed, like having a specific device that's compliant with specific security guidelines of the organization. And all of that is not just done when you log in the morning, but is a continuous process throughout the entire session. And then also logging out, even with federation through the back channels when the user stops using the application. That's important. So we've talked about a lot of requirements, and if the world is so complex, so why even do it? Why not move completely to the cloud? And the organizations have to adhere to their needs. There may be mission critical applications that have to remain on-prem, and not everything can move to the cloud overnight. The same is true for identity and access management. According to the Forrester study that I quoted earlier, 98% of those asked had issues with a cloud-only approach when it came to identity and access management. And in order to illustrate some of the typical shortcomings, and that's by no means a complete list here, let's start with cloud, since I was talking about this. So early cloud solutions on the right here on this slide have often focused on simplicity. And these solutions don't integrate well with legacy systems that you still have to operate because they are often mission critical for an organization. Cloud-only solutions also are known to not map well to on-prem processes. And while it is true that you should streamline any process when you migrate to a new platform, there are certain needs that established organizations have that typically on ease of use focused cloud-only solution cannot manage. And then the legacy applications that have to remain on-prem and have specific requirements typically cannot be managed with a cloud-only solution, which then leads to multiple systems, shadow identities, and basically not knowing the complete profile and behavior of a user. The on-prem solutions are known, and you've probably seen some of the limitations. They're not as flexible. They're typically heavily integrated, monolithic in architecture, sometimes not as scalable, especially when you think of IoT scale, adding non-human identities, not meeting the requirements to work from anywhere, as Heiko mentioned earlier. And then there are regulatory requirements that are also challenging to meet for anyone, but in particular for legacy applications. So what if your identity and access management system would have been purpose-built for hybrid IT? And Forrester actually has looked into this subject because hybrid IT is not a stage that you travel through quickly. And so Forrester calls the IAM platforms capable of dealing with hybrid IT in an excellent way. They call it hybrid IAM. And that's an IAM platform capable of running, unifying, and securing all digital identities in a hybrid IT environment. And if we dig a little bit deeper, hybrid IT basically bridges the gap between what has to remain on site and tapping into the additional and new capabilities and the speed of SaaS services in the cloud. And hybrid IAM basically secures all identities irrespective of where the application is located. And it should allow the easy integration and extension of new functionality without having a costly migration project. So being able to add third-party services like biometric behavior or other capabilities, and adding that to the identity and access management system is something that for us of use is key. So there are these three key topics. First of all, being able to phase it in without disruption, so modernize without disrupting your existing environment. The seamless access to from the user to any application, whether it remains on-premise or in the cloud, and the comprehensive and consolidated environment that gives you a single source of truth for all identities and the complete 360-degree view of the user. And hybrid IAM also doesn't force you to lose capabilities on-prem or settle for a compromise because you have part of your environment in the cloud and vice versa. Now, we in ForgeRock have what we believe the only platform that's comprehensive enough in functionality for identity and access management as a SaaS platform with consistent outcomes independent of the implementation choice as well. The ForgeRock platform can easily secure any hybrid environment with millions of users, and Heiko will go into a few use case examples based on the ForgeRock solution in a moment. But it is also important to understand that because you may not be able to move into the cloud with your identity and access management solution overnight, it's important to know that there are licensing possibilities that do not charge extra for any on-prem components as long as there is a valid cloud license for it. And so it's true, you should carefully select what remains on-prem and what goes into the cloud. But it's also good to have a licensing model that protects you if you decide to leave a few things on-prem for a while and then decide at your own speed and need based on market and other changes in the organization to move it into the cloud. So as I mentioned earlier, you can do everything we've talked about with the ForgeRock Identity Cloud shown here on the left, or you can implement it in your own data center on-premise or in a private cloud, or, and I'm sure Heiko is happy to help you, you could engage service layers and consume the ForgeRock Identity and Access Management platform as a private SaaS service that then could run in a cloud of your choice. With that, Heiko, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thank you. As a summary, tapping into multiple aspects that we discussed now during the last 30 and a bit more minutes, I'd like to go into two examples of customers that have adopted this approach. And the first example is a large-scale automotive customer where the situation in the past really was the IAM system. And maybe you remember, we talked about the globalization aspect of IAM here. In the past, there was one single on-premises deployment of the IAM system in a single region. And then the cloud strategy started, right? Well, you wanted to use and utilize the cloud features like scalability, like better performance, etc., and also adopt a better usability across the globe for a multitude of users. So the wish was also not only to move to the cloud, but also to adopt a multi-region approach for the IAM system. And what Gerhard already said is what's great about the ForgeRock IAM platform is really that you have consistent APIs across all different types of deployment models that you might have, that you can synchronize them, that you can align them on the usability and feature aspects of your implementation. So here, this customer really decided on, okay, we have a multi-phase journey here, where in the second phase, we lift everything to the cloud, to our private cloud, basically. And there we have the capability to really adopt a multi-region approach, also in the more, let's say, difficult and challenging regions of the world, where we can really control the infrastructure as we need to. And once we have set up this, the next step could be that we evaluate to bring certain types of user journeys or regions into then the public cloud offering, the SaaS offering, to really make it even easier to reduce maybe maintenance costs, etc. From that perspective, and focus even more on functional aspects of the whole system. So what you can see here is by having a system that is flexible to really adopt, you not only can utilize that to adopt to your current requirements, but you can with that build a journey that really fits your organization as it moves along. Where in most cases, I would say you don't know what the requirements will be in a year, very, very detailed. So it's good to have the flexibility and you can move around with the different deployment models and adopt quickly what changes around you while you do the migration. And again, another aspect that I want to stress here is because we have this feature parity between the different deployment models that the ForgeRock Identity Platform offers, what was great really is that it's not a lift and shift in the way that you just set up the same servers in the cloud and then run it. You have really a re-implementation utilizing the whole cloud feature set, but the configuration aspect of ForgeRock, for example, can be reused as is. So you don't have to think about all the usability aspects for every single user when you move to another approach, but you can really save your investment here when you move to the cloud, and only as this step in your journey focus on the non-functional aspects that you want to achieve here, and have really a small or non-impact at all for end users and also applications that are integrated with you, which is of course absolutely great if you have a migration journey like that, because we know as less dependencies you have to your system and to your project, the faster you can move, the less complex it gets. And I think what is already quite clear that complexity is a topic for us. Let's move to the other example, which also deals with one aspect of hybrid, let's say. Here we're talking about an insurance company that was seeing we have users in basically every type of deployment model that are hitting our systems. We have a multitude of user communities, being it customers from different departments, from different angles, being it a B2B scenarios with partners, etc., and also, of course, the own employees. And the decision was really having a single IDP strategy of also bringing all these types of communities into one system to not manage those types of users completely differently. But at the same time, as I said, it's an insurance company. Security is and regulation and governance is a super high topic here. So directly moving, for example, to SaaS offering was not possible here really. So the solution here really was to move the system here into the private cloud, but adopting a private so-called ingress and a public ingress, so that use cases where for security and governance reasons, all the traffic should be inside the same on-premises network or corporate network, let's say, and should basically never even hit the internet, that this capability can be reused. But at the same time, the same system with the flexibility that ForgeRock again offers you for a logical separation of use cases, and they even call it realms, for example, in Access Manager. But with the deviation here, you can really separate the user journeys between the different user communities and adopt the authentication journeys, for example, to really the use case that this user goes to when he wants to really access one of the target systems that are there. So by really having this capability here, this strategy really paid out in having now implemented a single IDP for all types of users that the company has, the insurance company has, but also all systems that are integrated, which really harmonized the whole landscape quite a lot, and also in a very short amount of time, which I think is a real success story here. So just two very, very different examples on how to deal with the hybrid requirements that your IAM system may hit, and different strategies that you can adopt depending on the specific requirements for your company. And I think that's it for the moment. I'm really eager to hear now questions and also comments of any kind from the audience.
Yeah. Thank you, Heiko. Just one comment, because I didn't mention it earlier, and I think it's kind of important. I mentioned in my presentation consistent functionality for on-prem applications and cloud applications when it comes to identity and access management. It's important to understand that the ForgeRock platform has one common code base. So whether you deploy it as an on-prem solution or through service layers as a private cloud, or if you operate it yourself in your cloud or you consume it as the ForgeRock Identity Cloud, the functionality and the capabilities are consistent. And so that makes it much easier to run certain users on certain user groups on-prem or certain applications on-prem and others off-prem. And that in context with that friendly licensing that you can run on-prem components on top of a cloud service, I think is a good way of engaging.
Yeah, absolutely, plus one on that. Yeah. Thanks for the amendment.
So now we're looking forward to questions.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Gerhard and Heiko, for these great insights and also sharing your experiences, especially with the last two examples also given. And as mentioned by Gerhard and Heiko, so please, dear audience, feel free if you have any comments, remarks, or questions. And of course, you can either use the chat, but of course also we would be happy to hear your voice. So you can just use the raise hand function and we'll certainly unmute your microphone. And just imagine we would be sitting in a lovely hotel next to each other and we were just having probably not a glass of wine yet, maybe, but a lovely coffee and maybe some nice late breakfast or brunch. But in the meantime, I received a couple of questions and I'm not sure who of you would like to take it, so I just pop it. In your introduction, you mentioned that today we work differently and a firewall can no longer protect the enterprise. I'm wondering what exactly has changed. We are still using VPN and that seems to work just fine. So could you please explain what's different and why VPN wouldn't work anymore?
Okay, let me take that. So, well, this really addresses a whole lot of topic. So let me first say, if this works for you now, then great. then you're happy to keep it as it is. But what we see across our customer base, first of all, with the majority or a lot of users moving to remote working and then suddenly, quote unquote, using VPN more, a lot of customers ran into scaling issues, ran into, with many users first using that, also user experience issues, where this process was not designed basically for all types of user communities that were now forced to use that. So help desk tickets rose to the top, etc., like the typical problems that you see there. So yeah, again, when that works for you, then that's great. But we see with a lot of customers that's not working as a piece of cake from that perspective. Then, if you have a strategy to move basically to a cloud-only strategy or a cloud-first strategy, for example, when you want to get more and more workload to the cloud. Then really the question is why you're getting more traffic and more users back to your corporate network, let's say. Is that really fitting the strategy that your company wants to adopt in that aspect? And how does it look? And then one aspect to really zoom into identity access management systems. What we also see is in many cases, when you have adopted an adaptive risk model, for example, for authentication, then typically you also evaluate the location of the user. And of course, for the IAM system, that typically looks like, in most cases, because you're making the life more complicated than it needs to be, it looks like the user is coming from the corporate network, and maybe you have less strict requirements for authentication, for evaluating access, etc. In that aspect. But in reality, looking at different certifications your company has, looking at the security community in IT, working remotely is not considered exactly as secure as working from the on-premises, where you have physical access restrictions to your office, etc. So really having now less requirements to log into systems, etc., I think was okay now and the hurry, but I don't really think that will do the trick in the future anymore. So really thinking about that is of value. And then last but not least, I would really recommend analyzing your traffic flow between users and the applications that they're accessing. What we found in many cases with customers is that you get kind of absurd flows where users really accessing a SaaS application directly, but the traffic during the authentication journey really moves across the globe because of these VPN configurations and then gateways that are set up inside the corporate network, etc., where it does not make the user experience that great, but also makes it very hard and difficult to evaluate the right type of access at the right time, etc., which is in the end our goal here. So really simplifying by having a zero trust architecture in mind, and really taking into account those different aspects directly before authenticating the user, for example, or giving him access to the resource he requested or she requested, makes your life actually simpler, not more complicated in the long run, I would say. Did I forget anything or something to add, Gerhard?
Well, yeah, I think applying zero trust thinking in whatever you do guides you down the right path. And I think you say, you don't have to rip and replace everything in one go, but define of what you would like to achieve when you grow up in digital, and then every project should be within these guardrails. Yeah.
And we have a question from Peter. How would you approach the requirement for a global consent management, not cookie consent management tool? Does your platform also cover consent management, or is this something to cover with a separate tool like SAP's Customer Data Cloud?
No, we have quite extensive consent management capabilities, and one of the taglines that we have been using for a while is no data about me without me. So the user should be in control of what he shares, whom he shares it with, and for how long. This is also true for T's and C's. Sometimes you have contracts and you have different versions of your T's and C's, so you can exactly see of who consented to which version. And yes, that's a capability this platform offers. Heiko, anything you want to add?
Only recommendation. If you're dealing with consent management, especially have in mind revoke cases. I see oftentimes that in first implementation types, you only think about giving consent to something and implement that in the system, but actually consent is also about revoking consent. And in many areas, if you look at the CCPA, so the California Data Protection Act, if you look at also the European GDPR, etc., always revoking consent at any time, especially for end users, when there's no real need to keep the consent as it is necessary. That is part of the deal. And if you don't have that in mind from the beginning, it can get difficult to really adopt that. So only small recommendation, because we saw oftentimes that this was looked at lately and then got really complicated to implement. Just as a short comment.
Perfect. Thank you, Peter. I hope this answered your question. If not, just please feel free. But yeah, thanks for the advice. So, and thanks, Peter, also for the question. And I have one more when it comes to zero trust. So could you maybe explain what aspects of zero trust you cover with your solution? You've been talking about a lot of things. Where would you suggest to start? Zero trust, cloud, or others? Who would like to take that on?
What you can't identify, you can't protect. So in that regard, identity is important. But to take a step back and maybe illustrate, where to start, because I think that was part of the question as well. The first thing is to define what it means for an organization to do digital business and to digitize processes end to end. And there may be multiple projects, and you will not implement in a rip and replace one go. It will be multiple, almost in an agile fashion, multiple steps. And first you determine what you would like to be able to perform in digital when you're done. Then you select the platform. I hope we gave good insight what to look out for. And then once you have done that, you basically start where the biggest fire is, honestly, but always with the context or within the guardrails also of zero trust. The world will not go back to where it was, so people will work from various places. And employers, as Heiko said, may not even be aware that the home office is offshore somewhere on an island. And that could have implications. So the better you are prepared for these things, the better it is for you, because it's a competitive advantage in the, when it's an employee, it attracts the best talent because you can give that freedom. And when you can understand the risk of someone as a customer accessing your services and differentiate between a bad actor and the customer is also a competitive advantage. So I hate to give the it depends answer, but I hope I gave some guidelines of a decision tree to walk down to arrive where you need to be.
And may I add, I just briefly want to stress what you said earlier, Gerhard, which is really, don't make this super big program where you, as you say, rip apart everything and start from scratch. It's almost never working really. But basically for every new IT project that you're now adopting, there's a whole lot of literature out there that is very good, that it's giving advice and helping what to consider for these types of IT projects that are arising now. And then, let's say, implementing here and there parts of it leads you much better to an end result where you want to end up with. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And with this, I think we're nearly at the end. But of course, if you have any questions you would maybe like to address later on, please feel free to reach out to Gerhard and Heiko. And as mentioned, you will, of course, also receive the recording and also the presentation with their contact details and also the links to those two white papers. And with this, Gerhard, anything you would like to tell our dear audience?
Well, thank you, Sonia, for guiding us through this. Thank you to the audience. Thank you for the questions. Please make use of the free workshop that IC Consult is offering. Also, please make use of the information on our homepage. And I just would like to leave you with one or two thoughts at the end. Identity and access management has been challenged for the longest time to make a trade-off between security and user experience. We believe an enterprise should not make to have those decisions and sacrifices. There is modern technology that allows you to get both, basically have the cake and eat it too at the same time. And we should really leave passwords behind us. The login-less experience is what we drive towards. So in an ideal situation, the platform is secure and invisible. And on that journey, please start rather earlier than later, because these projects take some planning time and they also take some effort. And the sooner you start, the less of a technology burden you have to challenge. Thank you.
And I think this is very good advice. So again, thank you also, of course, Gerhard and Heiko, for your great insights and for this great presentation. Also, as Steve and Tobias mentioned, it was good having you with us today. I found it really engaging. I've learned a lot, and I hope also the audience, you gained some new insights. Thank you very much for your time attending. And as mentioned, please don't hesitate to reach out to Gerhard and Heiko. And with this, hope to see you soon, maybe one day even face-to-face again, or the next time virtual. And if you have any questions, just let us know. Thanks for your time. Have a great day and see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.